Hello, this is Josh Bycer. Welcome to today's Critical Thought. It's going to be on another topic I'm sure no one will have any problems with, and that is Nintendo. Specifically, how Nintendo has somewhat fallen over about the last decade or so. I got a few extra amiibos here as, I guess, flame shield protection in a sense. But I have been a longtime fan of Nintendo. Besides the amiibos you can see back there, I've been playing Nintendo games since the age of 3. My first memory was pretty much of Super Mario Brothers. I've pretty much owned every Nintendo console with exception to the Virtual Boy. But even as a longtime fan of Nintendo, it's hard not to notice how they've had trouble remaining relevant and, more importantly, remaining in the top in terms of the game industry. And this is sort of a continuation of my critical thought on peripherals and accessories, because that has a major point about this. And I'll link it maybe there. Nintendo of today is a far different beast than Nintendo of the past, specifically of the late 80s to throughout most of the 90s into the early thousands. Nintendo being the king or having monopoly of the game industry during the late 80s basically gave them full reign to do whatever the hell they wanted. They imposed restrictions on how many cartridges a company could get for their game, what could their game be, porting and licensing issues, and it pissed off a lot of people. Pissed them off so much that Atari invented the company Tengen in order to pirate or mass produce their own cartridges. And basically, the arrival of Sega with the Sega Genesis in the United States was a huge deal, because it finally gave developers a chance to get out from under Nintendo's thumb. Into the mid-90s, when the massive amount of consoles came out, this was the period where Nintendo was sort of, they were still out on top, but they were no longer the only game in town. The Virtual Boy was pretty much the first time we really could classify Nintendo failing. And I think it kind of affected their own business practices. With the Nintendo 64, it was more of a return to form, but this was the evolution into 3D. And of course, Nintendo has had hit after hit. Super Mario 64, Pikmin, Smash Bros., and so on. The GameCube was really when we started to see this transitioning period of Nintendo. They stopped basically trying to compete directly with the other consoles and wanted to do their own thing. This is why the GameCube controller was completely different from the PS2 and the Xbox at the time. We have, of course, again, when I did my post about the standardization of gamepads, it was around the early thousands when this pretty much took form. But the GameCube went completely different. It had the very weird C stick, it had an L, R, a Z button, all the buttons weren't uniform, it was just very different to play. Of course, the games were great on the GameCube, and this would probably be the last time we could really say Nintendo had an all-around amazing library of first and third-party games. First and third-party is a big point, and one we're going to talk about in a few minutes. So, the Wii was really that major event for Nintendo. They just basically said, we're not competing with the Xbox 360 or the PS3. The Wii was completely unique, focusing on the motion or the gesture-based controls, the Wiimote and the nunchuck, and basically they wanted to create something completely original. They didn't want to try and be measured with the other consoles. And this is admirable, and it also gave them a real foothold in the casual/family market. But, as us core and hardcore gamers know, this was the time when the Wii and Nintendo really started to take that downward decline in terms of the mainstream market. And there are several big reasons for that. And the biggest one would be the actual controls itself with the Wiimote and nunchuck. In my talk or my critical thought on peripherals, I mentioned the fact that the problem with peripherals and accessories is that they really limit the appeal and the reach of your games. Whenever you're designing something completely unique, it's going to inherently limit people who are going to use it compared to the gamepad. Again, this has become the universal standard for what we're going to use for a control interface. It's allowed third-party developers to port their games to multiple platforms. It's made game design a lot easier. With the Wii, on the other hand, it's just completely starting at square one again. The Wiimote itself is only a few buttons long. The nunchuck is literally, I think, what was it, like 3 buttons? No, I'm sorry, it's 2 buttons, including the actual analog stick. And it requires a completely different way of holding and positioning. As a quick tangent and question for you folks watching this, I'm just wondering, did you hold the nunchuck in your dominant hand, or did you hold the Wiimote? For me, I had to hold the nunchuck in my dominant hand because of the fact that I had to use that for motion, or I'm sorry, for movement. But the problem with this interface, again, is that as a developer, why would you design your game exclusively for the Wii when you can design it for a universal platform or a universal gamepad, and then you have Xbox, PlayStation, and PC functionality just inherently built in? And the answer is pretty it's pretty obvious. Most people didn't do that. And the Wii saw just a drastically shrunk library compared to the other consoles. The third-party games we did get were either squared down compared to the other consoles, or were just the bargain bin shovelware family games. We saw like Family Feud, a lot of movie license-based games, etc. And it was reported that major developers such as EA literally limited what the Wii versions of their big ported games were compared to the other consoles. And while Nintendo still had amazing first-party games, the third-party library just declined and dropped down to almost nothing. Very few third-party titles were amazing. The rest had trouble using the Wiimote nunchuck, or were just built very basically. A lot of developers just did not want to make use of that. And that hurt Nintendo. Sure, they attracted a lot of casual and family gamers to it, but the problem with the casual market is what we're seeing with social games. It's not a long-term sustainable market. People who play Farmville or Kim Kardashian's Hollywood or Angry Birds or whatever, that social market is just going to be for that one game. It's not a market of the same thing as the core and hardcore who are going to follow multiple games and multiple developers. If your family loves Cooking Mama or Rayman or Wii Fit or whatever, they're not going to jump to other games. They're just going to play the specific game that they want to play. And while that is great for that one developer, or specifically great for Nintendo, it makes it a hard sell for other third-party developers and publishers. Again, if the market is only responding to one specific game or one specific genre, why should you risk porting your unique game to the Wii or working on that when you can have a much greater fan base and install base on the other consoles? And the answer, again, was simple. They didn't. And while the Wii had a very impressive early run, it really nosedived after that. Now, of course, again, the first-party titles were fantastic. Zelda, Xenoblade Chronicles, Pikmin 2, Pikmin, the remake, and then Pikmin 3 for the Wii U. We'll talk again about the Wii U probably in the next few seconds. And I love Nintendo's first-party games. But again, as a console, it was just never going to be first place. It just didn't have the library. And then when Nintendo moved to the Wii U, the troubles continued. Now, I will say Nintendo did do one thing very smart with this interface. Even though it has a lot of unique features to it with the touch screen and, of course, controlling like this with the motion sensors or the gyroscope, it still had the basic functionality. You still had 2 triggers and shoulders, 2 analog sticks, and of course the 4 buttons. There we go. But the problem though, and what still is limiting it, I'm going to see if I can somehow finagle this. Let me get this in the shot here. It is still, one second, there we go. It's still much more comfortable to hold the gamepad than is the Wii U tablet. And you can see why. The gamepad is not as wide. You don't have to hold it with your hands as far away from it as the other. And even then, because the analog stick is below, or I'm sorry, it's above it on the Wii U gamepad, it requires you to shift your hands down in order to use them. While when I'm holding the gamepad, let me put this back there. Hopefully that won't fall. I'm going to be in trouble. Because the buttons are above it, as you're holding it, it's a lot easier to transition to hit these buttons and then quickly go back compared to this, where this is not easy to hold. You have to shift your hands down to use these buttons and then back up. There's also the perception of the Wii U that ran into some trouble, and we are approaching 12 minutes. I know these critical thoughts like to be quick, but with the Wii U, a lot of people thought this was simply an expansion for the Wii, especially in terms of the consumer or the casual mainstream. For us core gamers, we knew this was going to be a new console. But again, it was still a very hard sell. There are some great games on the Wii U, but I really haven't had the desire to load it up since playing Mario Maker. And once again, that is the problem with Nintendo. They are a great first-party developer, first-party console, but they have just really had trouble selling themselves to the third party. And even more than that, they've had trouble in the past with indie developers. There's, of course, the famous issue with the Binding of Isaac in its original form not getting on the Wii Virtual Console. Or, no, the Wii Virtual Channel. I'm sorry. Now, of course, they've been making amends and trying to appeal, but it's been a real upward battle for them. For instance, Sony has had nothing but good luck with courting independent developers to the PS4. We have Clay Entertainment. There's been stuff like Headlander, and even stuff that I'm looking at lately like Metrico Plus, and a lot more. The system just has been a lot more welcoming and more inviting to indies. And again, third-party developers as well have had a lot more of a outreach and easier time with the PlayStation 4 and Xbox One than with the Wii U. So again, we are approaching 14 minutes. I can easily talk about Nintendo for another 20. If there's any specific topics regarding Nintendo you'd like me to touch on in an upcoming critical thought, let me know in the comments below, but I'll give my final thought now. In terms of Nintendo's new console, or what's been labeled the NX, it's going to be very interesting to see what this will bring. As you know, Satoru Iwata is sadly no longer head of Nintendo. He's passed away last year. And with a new head of Nintendo, that means changes in their philosophy and their development structure. With the NX, I think this is going to be very telling to see what Nintendo will do. Will they continue to stay the course with being, completely unique and original at the cost of accessibility and mainstream? Or will they try to rein it in and be something more similar to the Xbox and the PlayStation? And I'm actually not sure how I want them to go. Again, Nintendo's strongest strength has been their originality. anyone can buy an Xbox and a PlayStation 4 and they're going to get similar experiences. But Nintendo has always been the outlier. If you want something unique and never before seen, chances are it's going to be on a Nintendo system. But how are they going to court and again appeal to third-party developers and publishers? They need to figure out some way to be unique while still allowing developers to make use of something like this. And the big question, the one that I don't know what the answer is, can they do that? With the Wii U, this is entirely original, and you can do a lot with this. But how are you going to convince a third-party developer to fully commit to this instead of, again, a more mainstream console? And I would also say, this is just me, trying to be happy or trying to get something I really want, but that didn't just fall. But I really would like Nintendo to explore the PC. I mean, Sega has their virtual console with the Sega Mega Genesis collection. I would just love to be able to play Nintendo games on my computer. And I know there is that topic with Nintendo and their problems they've had with YouTube and that whole community, but again, that's another topic in of itself. And this is not going to be the last time we're going to talk about Nintendo. There's so much more to get into. But this is ending up as being an extra long critical thought, so I'm going to wrap it up here. Thanks so much for tuning in. Be sure to check out tomorrow's critical thought, and I believe we're going to be talking about Rock Band next. But for Nintendo, again, if there's any topics you would like me to touch on, leave them in the comments below, and I'm sure we're going to have more to say about them in the near future. Anyway, thanks again for watching today's critical thought, and I will see you all next time. Take care. Thanks for watching the video, everybody. If you enjoyed it, be sure to like and subscribe to the channel. Leave a comment, of course, share with your friends. It always helps out. Check out game-wisdom.com, where I examine the art and science of games. You can follow me on Twitch and Twitter under GW Bycer for the latest updates of new content. And be sure to check out our Patreon campaign. You can find us on Patreon under Game Wisdom if you would like to donate and help contribute to keeping Game Wisdom going. Your donations can not only give us the monthly funding we need to keep supporting ourselves, but if we can hit some goals, it will mean more great content for you. And there are some nifty little rewards there as well. Thanks again for watching this video, and be sure to tune into the next one real soon.